Well, good morning, everyone. As John said, my name is Paul Celuch. John and I are very involved in my company, which is called College Assistance Plus. Just a little bit of background. We started the business 16 years ago, and we've helped thousands of clients since then, all over the United States. I was a former executive for IBM, and I just recognized about 16, almost 20 years ago, that the continuing escalation of college prices was really handicapping families. 16 years ago, there was 200 billion in student loans. Today, there's $1.6 trillion. So one of our focuses is to try to get your son or daughter to the school with the major they desire, and I'll talk a little bit about how important that is. And then helping make sure that you get to the right college for the right price, out-of-pocket costs, and minimize the student loans. We also are as a Christian organization, we're also very focused on making sure that when students go to college, they don't lose their faith. We try to plug them into support groups, and John's going to talk a little bit about that later. But I wanted to take a few minutes and just talk about what's going on today. Obviously, the pandemic is on everybody's mind. Very unusual situations, but the impacts on colleges are multiple. One, I've never heard, I was telling one of our clients earlier this morning, I've never heard the term gap year spoken of so much. A gap year used to be kind of an odd arrangement. And now more and more families, in fact, one of our questioners is talking about a gap year. So I'll talk about that. So just about a gap year, there was a question concerning, is a gap year something that should be looked upon favorably? And several of the situations that are occurring, we're finding people or students may be accepted back on campus. They'll be in a campus dorm room, but they'll be forced to take non-traditional classes, maybe distance learning. We feel that that's, every place is going to be different, but we feel that's really a stilted learning environment. Before I pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year for a campus dorm room, I might want to consider a gap year, maybe entailing some distance learning. So we're counseling our clients accordingly. It's not for everybody, but certainly we're always trying to minimize the cost of college, and that's one of the things we're focused on. I heard I was talking to a college individual today, a provost, and he was saying that more and more campuses are going to turn into backpack campuses. And I had never heard that phrase before, but it's really interesting. What he was referring to is that you probably are aware of this. For those of you, I know a couple of you have students in college. You're probably aware of the fact that work-study monies are no longer available to the students because of the limited restrictions placed on campuses. So, in some cases, that's $1,500, $2,000, $2,500 a year. So students are going to be forced more and more into taking jobs off campus. And that's the terminology he was using with a backpack campus. So he's saying more and more students are going to be choosing not to live on campus, maybe doing distance learning on their own, maybe going part-time. But the manifestation of all those strategies is that there'll be less students enrolled, full-time enrollment. We talked to a couple colleges yesterday in Illinois. They're going to one student per dorm room. Now, these were dorm rooms that had 2 and 3 students in the past. So that really factors into having a lot less people on campus, a lot less people enrolled. And enrollment is the main financial driver for every college budget. So all that said, and I could bore you for minutes and minutes about the changes we see. This all makes for a greater and greater financial aid appeal opportunity for those of you who have seniors or maybe students in college. And a big part of what we do is appeal for more scholarship and grant money. We don't believe that loans are financial aid. We believe that true financial aid are monies you don't have to pay back. So we, in the last, I would say, 90 days have been very successful in appealing for more scholarship money for our clients. So if that's something that interests you, you might want to talk to John or I later about it. There was another question about athletics, and just let me, I think one of our listeners, viewers, has a son or daughter who's had some athletic money. We've been doing this for 16 years, and the amount of money available for athletics is much less than most people think. Unless you have a basketball player or a football player, athletic money is de minimis. The real money comes because the college wants your son or daughter. So what we do, we get, in the case of athletics, we try to get schools in the same conference. So for instance, I was just recently, I was dealing with a lacrosse player from the state of New York, and he was interested in a D2 lacrosse program. Believe it or not, there's more money for D2 athletes than there is for D1 athletes in most sports, not basketball and football, but everything else. So what we do, I positioned this young man's video. I looked at several D2 schools that he was interested in, and then I sent his video to, there were 13 schools in the conference. I analyzed whether there were, all the schools had seniors or juniors, which would be very attractive for him because he's coming in as a freshman. So the opportunity for him to play would be greater. And I sent his video to 7 out of the 13 colleges. 6 of them got back to me and said they wanted to talk to us. And he ended up going to a private college near New York City for $12,000 a year, room, board, and tuition. He would have never received that kind of offer if he had just done what most people do and reach out to 1 or 2 schools. So we use a competitive leverage, not only for athletics, for every one of our appeals. So it's very, very important that if you're interested in following our strategy, you talk to us about the schools that we think are competitive leverage for the schools you're interested in. So let me just back up a minute and talk for a minute about how we have learned to strategize and follow the model that we've developed. First of all, and I alluded to this earlier, it's very, very, very important that your son or daughter understand why they're going to college. And that sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but it's really the key to a successful college experience. The reason we say that is because the average student changes majors 4 times during his or her college career. That means they didn't know why they were going to school. We hammer home with our clients that you're going to school to launch a career, not to get a degree, to launch a career. So we use a program called Career Insight or Career Direct, and our consultants, we have multiple consultants, are very, very experienced in helping you determine what you want to do. We use shadowing experiences. We use calls with some of our clients. We have thousands of clients. So we have, if your daughter wants to be a veterinarian, we have 10 veterinarians who are clients of ours. They're very open to talking to our student clients who are interested in the veterinarian degree. So we really get involved with helping the student understand what that career entails. That's very, very, very important. Most people don't even look at that. Most people actually make an emotional decision on where to go to college. So they drive on the University of Virginia campus and they fall in love with Charlottesville, and that's where the student wants to go to college. Well, frankly, to make $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 decision based on an emotional visit is a silly way to choose a college, but that's what most people do. So we start out with the premise, we want to understand what you're going to do after college. The next thing we do is look at a family budget. So the budgeting process is a very important component of what we do. We ask for the financials. We actually use as a template the free application for federal student aid, which every college uses. And we emulate that in our strategy process. So we can tell you, depending on any school you pick, we have 2,300 schools in our database with tremendous amount of experience. So we can tell you, based on your FAFSA, expected family contribution, which that's the term that's derived from FAFSA submission. Before you ever submit a FAFSA, when your students are sophomores or juniors, we can tell you what every school is going to cost you out of pocket. In other words, not what they say financial aid is, loans. We always disregard the loans. And then how much more we think we can appeal for. So you're really making a valid decision on how much the school is going to cost and why it should be or should not be on your template of schools to consider. So we get involved with the career process, then we get involved with the financial process, and then we do everything associated with the common application or the application process. We have a professional writer on staff who actually writes children's books, but she's been with us now Jennifer's been with us about 7 years, and she's looked at thousands of essays, and she critiques every essay. She doesn't rewrite them, but she critiques them, and she's very, very good at doing this. Why do we place so much emphasis on essays? Because we found the cornerstone of a student's application are not what the high school guidance counselors say. What we found are really the material factors are A, your GPA in high school, your essay, your interview, and I'll speak at length about that in a second, and then your SAT or ACT scores. The reason I mentioned SAT and ACT last, that probably surprises you, but we found that schools are becoming more and more agnostic to the standardized tests. They know that there's no relevance or connection between a standardized test, a time standardized test, and how well you're going to do in college. If College Board could prove that, they charge a lot more for what they do. So we're seeing more and more colleges discounting standardized testing. That's not to say don't do it. And there's a reason to do it. And here's basically the only reason that we found. There's 4 levels of colleges: most selective, very selective, moderately selective, and open. So just let me talk about the top 3. Most selective would be Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Stanford. To be considered for admission here, not to get you in, but just considered for admission, you need a 1410 SAT, a 33 ACT, and 75% of the incoming freshmen are in the top 10% of the high school graduating class. Doesn't get you in, just gets you up to the plate. Next notch down would be very selective. That would be Syracuse University, George Washington University, Villanova, schools like that. To be considered for admission there, you need a 13.5 SAT, 1305, 28 ACT, and 50% of the incoming freshmen are in the top 10% of the high school graduating class. Now, those 2 levels, most and very selective, make up about 225 colleges out of the 2,300 we track. Most colleges are moderately selective. They're not bad schools, they just have a more open admissions policy. Schools like Ithaca, RIT, most of your state schools. So to be considered for admission to them, you need 1150 SAT, 24 ACT, and 50% of the incoming freshmen are in the top 50% of the high school graduating class. Now, think about this. And this is the way the colleges look at your student. If your student can qualify or come close to the most or very selective category, and he or she chooses to go to a moderately selective school, then they're an average raiser at the moderately selective school. So the school will naturally value them more and give you more scholarship money. That's one of the matrices we use to determine how much you're going to get and where you should look. And the other thing that most people don't realize, I had this conversation late yesterday with a family from California, was if you go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, and you're a very bright young student, but you're up against pretty tough competition academically. So you graduate the median level of Harvard or Princeton. 50% of the students above you, 50% of the students below you. If you and I go to a moderately selective school and I graduated in the top 5 or 10% of my class, if we're going to compete for an MBA, an medical degree, dental degree, an advanced grad degree, I'm more attracted to grad school than you are because I did better against my peers. So if you, and unfortunately, guidance counselors do this a lot. They'll say, well, you know, you're very bright, you should go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. They don't have to pay for Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. It's really a disincentive, actually a disadvantage, to go to a school where you're going to be really, really up against strong competition. I understand why people do it, but there's no real value in it. And for a person like me who manage sales organizations, I manage people from Brown, Princeton, Harvard, Dartmouth. There's no advantage. What I wanted was good communicators who had a strong work ethic. And you don't necessarily learn those skills in college. So let me talk about the last thing that's really, we found the most important thing about the schools you get into and how much money they give you. It's called the interview. And I'm not talking about the admissions interview. I'm talking about interview with the person that with the department you're gonna major in. So if you're gonna be a psychology major, Lord forbid, because we call that a major in unemployment, but if whatever you're gonna major in, engineering, computer science, whatever, We want our clients, before they make a decision to go to that college, uh, and before they've received their final financial aid offer, to do an in-person interview with the head of the department. Why? Because the head of the department has a material interest and a very strong advantage in how much money in scholarships that student's going to receive. Every department head wants to be certain that they're going to have motivated, engaged students in their department. So it's really a powerful thing if that student can impress that department head before we write the appeal, because we want to copy that department head in on the appeal just like we would a sports coach or any extracurricular involvement. So remember that. The interview is very important. Now, here's the way we do interviews, and I do most of them myself personally. We say to the student, or my consultants usually say to the student, before you meet with Paul, you want to be prepared to tell him what are the 3 personal strengths that you feel are characteristic of you, and how they're going to help the college. And when you do that, he's going to say to you, okay, your strength is organization. Tell me a story that's evidence of your organizational skills. We have a saying here: facts tell, but stories sell. And when you combine an articulate 16, 17, 18-year-old with the ability to interview with an adult and control the interview like we teach them to do, it's a powerful combination. And it can lead to much more scholarship money than any of the other things we talked about. Because as I found in my own career, and I think you'd agree with me, communication skills are critical. And the smartphone, frankly, has really denigrated communication skills. Young people think texting is communicating. That's just not true. So here's what we do in our interviews. And let me give you 2 examples that I think you'll really enjoy. The first example I'm going to use is a young lady. Her name was Hannah, and Hannah's one of our clients. She graduated Ithaca College. So the interview prep I was doing for her was to prepare her for interviewing for the physician's assistant program at a Buffalo college. I think it was Damon or Dewville. So I was Skyping with Hannah, and I said, Hannah, tell me the most important thing you learned in 4 years at Ithaca College. Now just listen to this, and I hope if there are some young people listening, it'll resonate with them. She said to me, well, you know, Mr. Celuch, I was the captain of the Ithaca College women's softball team my junior and senior year. And when I was elected captain, the coach said to me, Hannah, if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to learn to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And I said, wow, you know, I've been managing people a long time. I never heard that phrase. So I wrote it down. I said, Hannah, repeat it again. She did. And I said, okay, tell me the story behind this. How are we going to use this in an interview? Because facts tell, but stories sell. People remember stories. They may not remember your 1600 SAT, but they remember a story that you tell about your personal experience because it shows introspection. So Hannah said to me, well, when I was a senior at Ithaca, we recruited 2 young ladies in from, I think it was the New York City area, to play softball, and they were very good players. But we had a rule on the team: when you go out in the field, either for practice or a game, you must leave your cell phone in a basket in the dugout. You can't take your cell phone out in the field. We didn't want that kind of distraction. Well, they didn't obey the rule. They ran out in the outfield and they were taking pictures and texting their friends. And she said, I'm not an in-your-face kind of person, but that really aggravated me. And that's when I remembered what the coach told me. If you're going to be a good leader, you need to learn to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. So she ran out in the outfield. She got in their faces and she said, listen, if you don't put those cell phones back in the dugout like the rules say, I'm going to make sure you never play an inning in 4 years. You're going to ride the bench. She said they both started crying and they ran back and put the cell phones in the dugout. And she said that made such an impression on me. So she and I practiced weaving that into her interview answers because we're trying to make an impression on the person, this department head, if you will. We're trying to make an impression on him or her early in the conversation. We say we want to control the interview. And the way we do that is through these 3 personal strengths or characteristics with stories. So Hannah and I worked for about 30 or 40 minutes on the interview. She texted me a couple of weeks later and she said, when you get a chance, can you give me a call? So I said, sure. So I called her and she said, you'll be really excited to know I interviewed with a doctor who was the head of the physician's assistant program. And when I was done, the doctor said, Hannah, can you stay here a minute? I want you to tell that softball story to the 12 doctors who are the faculty on the physician's assistant program. I think they'll be really excited to hear that kind of story. So not only did it make an impression on the person that interviewed Hannah, but she had the opportunity to share that with the faculty, and it led to a bigger scholarship for her. My second story about interviewing is, this just happened a few months ago. This was a young man from our area. His father's an orthopedic surgeon, and he wants to go to Northeastern. His name was Cy. So he was prepped by the consultants before he met with me. And I said, Cy, you know, I'm going to ask you for 3 characteristics. What's your top one? He said, I'm responsible. And I said, well, Cy, you know, we talk about facts tell, but stories sell. What kind of story are you going to tie into responsible? He said, and you know, there's a big department grocery store chain here called Wegmans. They're pretty nationally known, but they're really big in the Northeast. He said, well, I've been a cashier at the Wegmans flagship store for about 1.5 years. And he said, do you know, now I shop at Wegmans continually. He said, do you know the most important job at Wegmans? And I said, no, Cy, what is it? He said, it's the helping hands people, the people that bring the carts in, shopping carts in from the outside. And I said, really? I said, why is that so important? He said, well, think about it. If you don't have carts, you can't shop, which made sense to me. I felt like a dunce for asking him the question, but it was really pretty good the way he answered. So I said, well, Cy, where are you going with this story? He said, well, I'm a cashier. But the manager came to me last 4th of July, this was about 1 year ago, and said, Cy, we're bringing all the store managers of the Helping Hands supervisors, and we're going to have a picnic for them with a training session on the 4th of July weekend. So I need you to manage the Helping Hands people at the store, our local store here. And it's a very busy store. And of course, 4th of July weekend would even be busier. And he said, it was a young lady, and he said, you know, I'm not sure I can do this. These are adults I'm going to be managing. She said, I've watched you for 1.5 years. I know you're responsible, and people really like you. You're a good communicator. I want you to do it. So he did it. And I said, Cy, how did it go? He said, well, let me show you this letter. So he takes this letter out of his pocket, and he almost blew me away with this. I read the letter. It was on Wegmans letterhead, signed by the store manager. And I happen to know, I know a lot of the executives at Wegmans. These store managers make $250,000 a year. They're a very responsible position. And this young lady wrote that Cy did a phenomenal job. He was one of the most responsible people that she had ever worked with for anybody, any age. And she would love to have him come back and work for Wegmans in the executive training program when he graduates college. I said, Cy, don't ever lose this letter. This letter is such a great letter for an interview. I mean, pulling that out and letting me read it, it made such an impression on me, and I'm sure it will or has already with the school department head that he's going to use that in. So that's, you know, just emblematic of facts tell, but stories sell. So we really place an emphasis on interviewing. And we also place a big emphasis with our clients when they go to college, they should take communication courses. And when I say that, I mean courses where you have to stand up in front of people and talk. That's the most underutilized, fearful skill that everybody has. They're afraid to stand up in front of people and talk. If you can communicate effectively, verbally, in front of people, you will be very successful. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room as long as you can speak clearly and articulately. So those are some of the things we look at. And, you know, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you guys may have. John, are there any on the chat room that you can share with me?
Can you share any anecdotes about people with younger students, maybe 10th to 11th grade, that are trying to figure out their career major in ways we've seen students, you know, come to life and really find their purpose?
Sure. Just to elaborate on a little bit what John said, our Career Direct and Career Major program is run by our consultants, and they're trying to do a couple things. They're trying to infuse in the student. This is what this career entails. As I mentioned earlier, a veterinarian. This is what a veterinarian does. And when we initiate shadowing experiences and maybe just um, communication talks with the veterinarians, one of the big surprises is, it's not all roses. Sometimes you're cleaning out, the dog pens, and that's not what you became a veterinarian to do, but that's part of the process. So we want to give them a real insight. We've done this with people in the law profession, people who want to be in radio and TV, people who want a career in theater. Uh, Communicate. I just worked the other day with there's one of, people don't understand, one of Amazon's biggest profit centers is called Amazon Web Services. It's the way they track and deliver their packages through these data services, and Amazon sells that capability to outside firms. So Amazon Web Services is a tremendous business, and one of our clients, we've helped 3 of his kids, is a consultant with Amazon Web Services. So whenever a young person wants to major in computer science or computer technology, I arrange a conference call with Jim, who's our expert, and he gives them great detail from a real life example of what you do with computer technology, security, and Amazon Web Services. So we really try to give the student a clear picture of what he or she is going to do when they graduate with that degree. And just as importantly, we want to give them a clear picture of how much money they can make. Compensation is a very important part of your future, particularly if you borrow money. So let me give you an example of that. We have part of our model is called payment to future income. So what we're saying in that phrase is, if you're going to borrow a lot of money, we want to make sure you can pay it back in a timely fashion. And maybe your college choice should be predicted, or part of your college choice should be predicated on how much that school is going to cost. As long as it gives you a degree and you don't borrow a lot of money, that's what we mean by payment to future income. So if you're going to be a social worker and you're going to make $28,000 a year, you cannot, or a teacher and going to make $45,000 a year, it's crazy to borrow $150,000 or $200,000. People do it all day long, but it has the tendency to ruin their life financially afterwards. So we get very involved with the student and family. I mentioned we run the financial models in concert with what colleges you're interested in and the career aspirations you have. So that's all wrapped together in payment to future income. We think too many people, as I said earlier, make emotional decisions not predicated on, not predicated on how much money they can pay back. And let me give you a real vivid example of that. We have a client who was one of our first clients. He's a radiologist. He makes $220,000 a year. And he went to the University of Rochester, University of Rochester Medical School, University of Rochester for his medical internship. He just bought his first house. Now, I'm pretty close to them. I know the family very well. I've helped all 5 kids in their family. This young man just bought his first house. He could only qualify for a $100,000 mortgage. He makes $220,000 a year. When I talked to him over the holidays, I said, Joel, why did you buy where you bought? I know the neighborhood. He said, because I have $440,000 in student loans. And that's coloring every decision I make financially and personally. Now, here's the real rub. He really hates being a radiologist and he wants to go back and teach at a college level. But the college level faculty position he's looking at only pays $125,000. So he cannot make his loan payments and be financially responsible if he steps back away from radiology. So think about that. Here's somebody on the surface who's making a lot of money, is a doctor, a specialist, and hates what he does because he's wrapped up in these college loans. So that's what we're trying to protect people from. And it happens at every level. I mean, I mentioned earlier, kind of with tongue in cheek, a psychology major. I find so many young people in their major changes during their college career default to psychology. They take a psychology course and they say, this is really interesting. The problem is there's not a lot of jobs out there for people with a psychology major. That's the other component of what we talk about. What are the job capabilities in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? There's not going to be a lot of jobs for internal combustion engine, like the gasoline engine that powers motor vehicles. I read the statistic the other day that said by 2024, which isn't that far away, 50% of the brand new vehicles, passenger vehicles, will be electrically powered. So if you're going to be a mechanic with gasoline powered engines, there's probably not going to be a job for you. So those are the kind of things we get involved in. One other thing I would caution you about, and then I'll talk a little bit about loans and finances. The average student changes majors 4 times in college. People don't realize this, but when you change majors, that can attenuate your 4-year degree. In New York State, I just happen to know this, the average student graduates in 5.5 years, not 4 years, not 5 years, 5.5 years. And students in colleges throughout the country, I look at thousands of financial aid awards. They always talk about a 6-year graduation rate. Nobody quotes 5-year rates. Nobody quotes 4-year rates. They talk about a 6-year graduation rate. So what they're saying to you, if you're smart enough to understand it, if you come to this school, 70% of people graduate in 6 years. And nobody signs up for that, but that's what happens. So just let me finish up by talking a little bit about what we do in the way of funding. We're very, very familiar with the entire lending process. We call it the financial opiate of America, but it's still an important component of paying for college, unfortunately. So what we do, we have lending relationships on our website. Our web is collegeassistanceplus.com. You can go on there and you'll probably receive better rates than you can get on your own if you go to our loan link, because we do so much with those companies. But a couple of warnings I wanted to share with you. The first loan colleges offer after the loans in your student's name, which is called a federal direct loan, your student can only borrow $31,000 over 4 years in his or her own name. Beyond that, a credit-worthy cosigner, usually a parent, has to cosign for that. Those loans are dangerous loans because if those loans that the parent cosigns for go into default, it can jeopardize the parent's Social Security and Medicare, and nobody tells you that. So we're very, very, very concerned about protecting our clients in co-signing for loans, particularly in large sums. The other loan we can't stand is the Parent Plus loan. That's PLUS. And every college offers some way, shape, or form the Parent Plus loan in their financial aid award. It's the default offering. The reason the colleges push it is because they get a 4% finder's fee for every dollar borrowed through a Parent Plus loan. So if you borrow $20,000, you don't get $20,000, you get $19,200, and the college gets $800 as a finder's fee. And nowhere, and I've looked at thousands of financial aid awards, nowhere is that ever articulated in the financial aid award. I don't know how the colleges get away with that. It seems to me full disclosure should cover that. So, you know, that's kind of a very high level of what we do. I think I've covered most of the questions.
I think there's one thing you might just want to think about the people that have current high school seniors that are already planning to go to a certain college. What is available for them to perhaps reduce the tuition, or if their students already in college?
Sure.
What's the requirement? What can we do, and how can we specifically help too?
Sure. Well, we have an appeal process that's separate. I mean, it's an integral part of our total model, but it's a separate offering to people that like John described. Somebody who's a senior in high school, who's committed or is looking at one school or several schools, and we have an appeal process that we use. Very modestly priced, and the return on investment is usually exponential. So what we do is we look for the leverage school. In fact, I was just talking to somebody who's looking at James Madison University versus Virginia Tech versus Coastal Carolina. And those are schools that we've all negotiated with very successfully. So what we do is we create an appeal. We look at the offers you have pending and where you want to go and what you've already received. And then we compare those to offers in our historical database. So if you name a college, University of Pittsburgh, I can tell you typically what we get from them and how much more or Duquesne, how much more we're able to negotiate for. So it's a very powerful process, and you don't have to be a client. You can just sign up for our appeal model, and you know, it's a standalone financial application model. So and it's very successful, and if you have a senior, it's not too late to ask for more money. In fact, with the environment today, it's really a good time to ask for more money, because as I tried to articulate earlier, colleges are really petrified about maintaining their incoming enrollment. That's why I couldn't believe the other day when I read that Syracuse University in upstate New York raised their price from 73,000 a year to 76,000. It was like, are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing? Because I think every college is going to struggle with making their enrollment numbers. And if they're not telling you that, it's because they don't want you to know it. So you're really in a consumer driver's seat today.